Times Square was alive with lights and noise, until a single scream cut through it all. Somewhere in the crowd, a little girl had vanished, and every second now counted. It was a typical Friday night in New York City. Tourists laughed, street performers played music, and the air buzzed with the hum of traffic and neon. But for one NYPD officer on patrol, the night changed in an instant. A mother's desperate cry for her missing daughter shattered the rhythm of the city. From that moment, the officer knew the clock was ticking, and failure was not an option. If you believe stories of courage should be told, subscribe to the channel and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Because what happens next will test everything this officer stands for. Officer Michael Rodriguez had been walking his beat through Times Square for 3 years, but he'd never heard a sound quite like that. It cut through the usual symphony of car horns, street music, and tourist chatter like a blade through silk. A mother's scream of pure terror. He turned toward the sound, his radio crackling softly on his shoulder, his hand instinctively moving to rest on his duty belt. The neon lights of Broadway cast their familiar glow across the wet pavement, painting everything in blues, reds, and electric yellows. But something was different now. Something was wrong. "My daughter!" The woman's voice rose again, panic thick in every syllable. "She was right here. She was right next to me." Rodriguez quickened his pace, pushing through a cluster of tourists taking selfies in front of the massive digital billboards. His dark eyes scanned the crowd, already calculating distances, exits, potential hiding spots. In his 3 years patrolling these streets, he'd learned that Times Square could swallow a person whole if you didn't know where to look. The woman stood near the red steps, her hands pressed to her face, tears streaming down her cheeks. She was maybe 30, wearing a light jacket that was already soaked from the evening drizzle. Her whole body shook as she turned in circles, desperately searching the sea of faces around her. "Ma'am," Rodriguez said, his voice calm but urgent as he approached. "I'm Officer Rodriguez, NYPD. Tell me exactly what happened." She looked up at him with eyes that held every parent's worst nightmare. "We were just taking pictures by the steps. Emma, my daughter, she's only 7. I turned away for maybe 10 seconds to put my phone in my purse, and when I looked back..." Her voice broke. "She's gone. She just disappeared." Rodriguez felt his chest tighten. 10 seconds. That's all it took in a place like this. He keyed his radio, his thumb pressing the familiar button as he looked out over the crowd of hundreds, maybe thousands of people moving in every direction. "Central, this is Unit 472. I have a missing child, female 7 years old, last seen at the red steps in Times Square, requesting immediate assistance and camera surveillance review." The static crackled back. "Copy, 472. Description of the child." Rodriguez looked at the mother, who was already pulling out her phone with trembling fingers. "Emma," she whispered. "Her name is Emma. She's wearing a pink jacket and blue jeans, brown hair in pigtails. She has a small birthmark on her left cheek." The officer relayed the information, his trained eyes already scanning the crowd. Every face that passed could be a potential witness. Every shadow between the buildings could be a hiding place. Every second that ticked by made the search exponentially harder. "We're going to find her," he told the mother, and the certainty in his voice surprised even him. But looking at this woman's face, at the raw terror in her eyes, failure simply wasn't an option. Not tonight, not on his watch. The neon lights continued their endless dance across the wet streets, but now they felt different, urgent, almost accusatory. Somewhere in this chaos of lights and movement, a 7-year-old girl named Emma needed him to be the hero she didn't even know was looking for her. Rodriguez positioned himself at a higher vantage point on the red steps, his eyes methodically sweeping across the crowd. The technique was something they'd taught him at the academy. Divide the area into grids, scan each section thoroughly. Don't let panic override procedure. But standing here now with a child's life potentially hanging in the balance, Those classroom lessons felt inadequate against the sheer scale of Times Square on a Friday night. What was Emma wearing again? He asked the mother, whose name he'd learned was Sarah Mitchell from Ohio. She and her daughter were in New York for the weekend, a mother-daughter trip that had turned into every parent's worst nightmare. Pink jacket, bright pink, Sarah said, her voice barely audible over the street noise. And jeans. She had her hair in 2 braids with little pink ribbons. She loves pink. Her voice caught on the past tense, and Rodriguez could see her starting to spiral into that dark place where parents' minds go when their children disappear. She still loves pink, Sarah, he said firmly. We're going to find her. His radio crackled to life. Unit 4272, this is Central. We've got eyes on the surveillance feeds, multiple cameras covering the Red Steps area, reviewing footage from 20-45 hours onward. Rodriguez glanced at his watch. It was now 2103 hours. Emma had been missing for 18 minutes. In a place like Times Square, 18 minutes was an eternity. He keyed his radio. Central, any visual on the subject? Negative so far, still reviewing. We've got additional units en route to your location. Rodriguez felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders. The weight of responsibility, of being the last line of defense between an innocent child and whatever dangers lurked in the shadows of the city. He'd felt it before, during domestic violence calls, during traffic accidents, during every moment when someone's life depended on his actions. But this felt different. This felt personal. A flash of pink caught his eye near a souvenir stand about 50 yards away. His pulse quickened as he focused on the spot, but it was just a tourist wearing a pink scarf. False alarm. He forced himself to breathe, to stay methodical. Officer? Sarah grabbed his arm. There, I think I see her. Rodriguez followed her pointing finger toward a group of teenagers taking photos near the TKTS booth. For a moment, he thought he saw a small figure in pink, but as the group shifted, he realized it was just someone's backpack. It's okay, he said, placing a reassuring hand on Sarah's shoulder. We're going to check every possible location. Emma's smart, right? You said she's a smart kid? Sarah nodded through her tears. Very smart. She knows her address, her phone number. She knows not to talk to strangers, but her voice trailed off as the implication hung in the air. In a crowd like this, a 7-year-old could easily become confused, disoriented, scared. Rodriguez's radio buzzed again. 4272, we've got a possible sighting on camera 3. Small subject in pink clothing heading west on 47th Street toward 8th Avenue. Cannot confirm identity from this distance. Rodriguez felt his adrenaline spike. Copy, Central. I'm moving to that location now. He looked at Sarah. Ma'am, I need you to stay right here in case Emma comes back to this spot. I'm going to check out this lead. He was already moving as he spoke, his long strides carrying him quickly through the crowd. People seemed to sense his urgency and stepped aside as he passed. The neon lights blurred into streaks of color as he focused on the destination ahead. 8th Avenue was less crowded than the heart of Times Square, but still busy enough that a small child could easily get lost or confused. Rodriguez scanned every doorway, every alley entrance, every space where a scared little girl might seek shelter from the overwhelming chaos of the city. His radio crackled. Unit 472, negative on visual confirmation. Subject moved out of camera range. Rodriguez cursed under his breath. Another dead end. But he couldn't give up. Somewhere in this maze of lights and people, Emma was counting on him, even if she didn't know it. The bodega on the corner of 47th and 8th was exactly the kind of place a lost child might wander into. Warm, well lit, with the friendly smell of fresh coffee and the promise of safety. Rodriguez pushed through the glass door, the bell chiming overhead as he entered. "Excuse me," he said to the clerk behind the counter, a middle-aged man with kind eyes who looked up from his newspaper. "I'm looking for a missing child. 7-year-old girl, pink jacket, brown hair in braids. Have you seen anyone like that in the last 20 minutes? The clerk's expression immediately grew serious. Missing child? Here in Times Square? He shook his head. I haven't seen any little girl matching that description, officer, but... He paused, thinking. There was a man who came in about 15 minutes ago. Nervous-looking guy. Kept looking over his shoulder. Bought some candy and asked if we had a bathroom. Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. Can you describe him? Tall, thin, maybe 40 years old, dark hair, wearing a black jacket. He seemed off, you know, like he was in a hurry but trying not to show it. Rodriguez keyed his radio immediately. Central, this is 472. I need you to expand the search parameters. Possible suspect, male, approximately 40 years of age, tall, thin build, dark hair, black jacket. Last seen on foot near 8th Avenue and 47th Street. Copy, 472, relaying to all units. The clerk leaned forward. Officer, you think this man might have something to do with the missing girl? Rodriguez didn't want to jump to conclusions, but in his experience, when a child disappeared in a crowded place like Times Square, you had to consider every possibility. I don't know yet, but I appreciate the information. If you see him again, or if you see the little girl, please call 911 immediately. He left the bodega and continued west on 47th Street, his eyes scanning every face, every shadow, every possible hiding spot. The rain had picked up slightly, making the neon reflections on the pavement more vivid, but also making visibility more challenging. Street lamps created pools of light, separated by patches of darkness where anything could be hidden. His radio crackled. All units, this is Unit 478. I've got a possible match on the suspect description. Male subject in black jacket heading south on 9th Avenue, approaching for questioning. Rodriguez felt a surge of hope mixed with dread. If this was connected to Emma's disappearance, every second mattered. He changed direction, moving quickly toward 9th Avenue, weaving between pedestrians and street vendors who were starting to pack up their goods for the night. Unit 478, what's your status? He radioed. Subject stopped for questioning. Negative on any connection to the missing child. False alarm, 4-7-2. This guy's just a tourist from Jersey, got lost looking for his hotel. The disappointment hit Rodriguez like a physical blow. Another dead end. Another precious few minutes lost, while Emma remained missing somewhere in the urban maze around them. He turned back toward Times Square, his mind racing through possibilities. Emma was 7 years old, smart according to her mother, but still just a child in one of the most overwhelming environments in the world. If she wasn't taken, and God, he hoped she wasn't taken, then she was somewhere nearby, probably scared, probably crying, looking for her mother. The thought of that little girl, alone and afraid in the chaos of Times Square, made him walk faster. His radio remained quiet as he made his way back toward the red steps where Sarah waited. The silence felt ominous. When he arrived, Sarah's face lit up with desperate hope. Did you find her? Please tell me you found her. Rodriguez hated having to shake his head. Not yet, but we're following every lead. Sarah, I need you to think carefully. Are there any places Emma particularly likes? Toy stores, candy shops, anything that might attract her attention? Sarah wiped her eyes with a tissue that was already soaked with tears. She loves the big toy store. The one with all the lights and the Ferris wheel inside. But that's blocks away. She wouldn't go there alone, would she? Rodriguez wasn't sure of anything anymore, but he knew they had to check every possibility. Emma had been missing for over 30 minutes now, and with each passing moment, the search area expanded exponentially. We're going to check everywhere, he promised. Every store, every corner, every place a little girl might go. But even as he said the words, he could feel the weight of the city pressing down on him. Somewhere in this vast maze of lights and concrete, a 7-year-old girl needed him to find her before it was too late. Rodriguez made a decision that went against standard procedure, but felt right in his gut. Instead of waiting for backup units to systematically canvass the obvious locations, he was going to check the places most people wouldn't think to look. The narrow alleys, the service entrances, the hidden corners where a scared child might seek shelter from the overwhelming chaos of Times Square. "Sarah, I want you to stay with Officer Martinez," he said as a female officer approached them. "She's going to take you to check the toy store and some of the other shops Emma might have wandered into. I'm going to search the side streets." Sarah grabbed his arm. "What if she's hurt? What if someone took her and they're already gone? What if—" "Sarah," Rodriguez interrupted gently but firmly, "I need you to stay focused on finding Emma, not on worst-case scenarios. Emma is smart, and she's probably looking for you just as hard as we're looking for her." He left them and headed toward the narrow alley that ran behind the theaters on 46th Street. The contrast was stark, from the bright, overwhelming stimulation of Times Square to the dimmer, quieter world of the service alleys where delivery trucks unloaded and theater employees took their smoke breaks. His flashlight beam cut through the shadows as he walked, checking behind dumpsters, near fire escapes, anywhere a small child might try to hide. The sound of his footsteps echoed off the brick walls, and he found himself calling softly, "Emma, Emma, if you can hear me, I'm a police officer. Your mom is looking for you." Nothing. Just the distant rumble of traffic and the occasional sound of a door slamming somewhere in the maze of back entrances. He keyed his radio as he continued searching. "Central, this is 472. What's our status on additional units?" 472, we've got 6 units now canvassing the Times Square area. K9 unit en route. ETA 15 minutes. 15 more minutes. Rodriguez tried not to think about how much could happen in 15 minutes. How far a child could wander, or worse, how far someone could take her. He emerged from the alley onto 45th Street and immediately noticed something that made his pulse quicken. There, caught on a chain-link fence surrounding a small construction site, was a small piece of pink fabric. It was wet from the rain, but it was definitely pink, and it was at about the height a 7-year-old would be if she had been running. Rodriguez carefully removed the fabric with his pen, not wanting to contaminate potential evidence, and keyed his radio. Central, possible physical evidence, pink fabric, possibly from the victim's clothing, located at the construction site on 45th Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue. Copy 472, CSI unit advised. Rodriguez shined his flashlight around the construction site. It was a small area, maybe 30 by 40 feet, surrounded by an 8-foot chain-link fence. But there, near the corner, he could see where someone small could potentially squeeze through a gap where the fence didn't quite meet the building. "Emma?" he called out louder now. "Emma? If you're in there, you're not in trouble. Your mom is waiting for you." A sound made him freeze. It was faint, almost lost in the ambient noise of the city, but it sounded like crying. Rodriguez quickly made his way to the gap in the fence. It was tight, but he managed to squeeze through, his uniform scraping against the metal. His flashlight beam swept across the construction site, past stacks of building materials and a small trailer that served as the site office. "Emma!" he called again. This time, the sound was unmistakable. Soft sobbing, coming from behind a pile of concrete blocks near the far end of the site. Rodriguez felt his heart rate spike as he quickly but carefully made his way across the uneven ground. "Emma, I'm a police officer. I'm here to help you find your mommy." The sobbing stopped abruptly, and Rodriguez could picture a frightened little girl holding her breath, trying to decide if she could trust the voice in the darkness. "Your mom is very worried about you," he continued, his voice as gentle as he could make it while still being heard over the city noise. She told me you're wearing a pink jacket and that you have pretty braids in your hair. She also told me you're very smart and very brave. A small voice, barely audible, came from behind the concrete blocks. I want my mommy. Rodriguez felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought him to his knees. I know you do, sweetheart. And I'm going to take you to her right now. Rodriguez slowly made his way around the pile of concrete blocks, his flashlight held low so as not to frighten the child any more than she already was. What he saw broke his heart and filled him with relief simultaneously. Emma sat huddled against the wall, her pink jacket torn and dirty, her carefully braided hair disheveled. She had her knees pulled up to her chest and her face buried in her arms, making herself as small as possible. She was shivering, whether from cold or fear or both, Rodriguez couldn't tell. "Hi, Emma," he said softly, crouching down to her level, but keeping some distance so she wouldn't feel cornered. "My name is Officer Rodriguez. I've been looking for you with your mum." She looked up at him with wide, scared eyes, tears streaming down her cheeks. He could see the small birthmark on her left cheek that Sarah had mentioned. "I got lost," she whispered. "I couldn't find my way back." "That's okay, sweetheart. Getting lost happens to lots of people in the big city. The important thing is that you're safe now." Rodriguez keyed his radio with one hand while keeping his eyes on Emma. "Central, this is 4-7-2. I've got her. Subject located safe at the construction site on 45th Street. Request immediate medical evaluation and reunification with the mother." The relief in the dispatcher's voice was audible even through the static. "Copy. 472. Excellent work. EMS and additional units en route to your location." Rodriguez clipped his radio back to his shoulder and slowly extended his hand toward Emma. "Would you like me to take you back to your mom now? She's been very worried about you." Emma nodded, but didn't move toward him. Rodriguez could see that she was still scared, still not entirely sure she could trust him despite his uniform and badge. "You know what?" he said, sitting down on the ground so he would seem less intimidating. "Your mom told me some things about you. She said you're 7 years old and that you're very smart. She also said you love the color pink, which I can see is true because you picked a very pretty pink jacket." A small smile ghosted across Emma's face. "My mommy bought it for me, for our trip." "She told me about your trip too. She said you came all the way from Ohio just to see New York City." "That's pretty exciting, isn't it?" Emma nodded again, and Rodriguez could see her starting to relax slightly. "We were going to see the big toy store tomorrow, and maybe go on the subway." "That sounds like fun. And you know what? You're still going to be able to do all those things. But right now, your mom really wants to give you a big hug. Do you think you'd like that?" "Yes," Emma said, finally speaking in more than a whisper. Rodriguez slowly stood up and extended his hand again. This time, Emma reached out and took it. Her small hand was cold and damp, but she gripped his fingers tightly as he helped her to her feet. "Are you hurt anywhere, Emma? Did you scrape your knee or bump your head when you came in here?" She shook her head. "I was scared. There were so many people and so many lights, and I couldn't see my mommy anywhere. So I ran, but then I got more lost, and I found this place to hide." Rodriguez carefully guided her back toward the gap in the fence, his radio already crackling with updates from other units. "Emma, you did the right thing by finding a safe place to wait. But next time, if you ever get lost again, the best thing to do is find a police officer or go into a store and ask them to call the police. Can you remember that?" "Yes," she said solemnly. As they reached the fence, Rodriguez could hear sirens in the distance and see the flash of emergency lights reflecting off the buildings. Soon, the quiet construction site would be filled with EMTs and police officers, all there because of this one little girl who had gotten scared and lost in the chaos of Times Square. But for now, in this moment, it was just the two of them making their way back toward the light and noise of the city, toward a mother who was probably counting every second until she could hold her daughter again. As Rodriguez helped Emma through the gap in the fence, he immediately noticed something that made him instinctively position himself between the child and the street. There, about 30 yards away, near a hot dog cart, stood a figure in dark clothing who seemed to be watching them intently. The man was tall and thin, wearing what appeared to be a black jacket, and he had been standing in the same spot for the entire time it had taken Rodriguez to coax Emma out of the construction site. More concerning was the way he seemed to melt back into the shadows when he realized Rodriguez had spotted him. "Emma," Rodriguez said quietly, lifting the little girl up so she wouldn't have to walk through the puddles and debris, "I want you to put your arms around my neck and hold on tight, okay?" Emma complied without question, her small arms wrapping around his shoulders. Rodriguez could feel her heart beating rapidly against his chest, whether from excitement at being rescued or residual fear from her ordeal. Rodriguez keyed his radio with his free hand while keeping his eyes on the area where the figure had been standing. "Central, this is 472, proceeding to reunification point with the child. Request immediate patrol unit sweep of 45th Street between Broadway and 8th Avenue. Possible suspicious subject, male, black clothing, may be connected to the incident. Copy 4272. Units 479 and 4712 are en route to your location for escort." Rodriguez began walking quickly toward Times Square, taking a route that would keep them in well-lit, populated areas. Emma's weight was nothing to him. She couldn't have been more than 60 pounds. But he found himself hyper-aware of every shadow, every doorway, every potential threat between them and safety. "Officer Rodriguez." Emma's voice was small against his ear. "What is it, sweetheart?" "There was a man earlier, when I first got lost. He asked me if I needed help, but my mommy told me never to talk to strangers, so I ran away. That's how I got even more lost." Rodriguez felt ice form in his stomach. "Emma, that was exactly the right thing to do. Your mommy taught you very well. Can you tell me what this man looked like?" "He was tall, and he had dark hair. He was wearing a black jacket, I think. But something about him felt scary, so I ran." Rodriguez keyed his radio again, this time with more urgency. "Central, 4272. The child reports contact with a suspicious male, matching the description I provided earlier. Tall, thin, dark hair, black jacket. Subject may have approached the child before she entered the construction site. This is no longer just a missing child case." The response was immediate. "Copy 472. All units, be advised we now have a potential attempted abduction situation. Subject is still in the area and should be considered dangerous." "Nay." Rodriguez could see the flashing lights of emergency vehicles ahead as they approached the red steps where Sarah was waiting. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, that somewhere in the maze of tourists and street vendors and neon lights, someone with bad intentions was keeping track of their movements. He picked up his pace, Emma's arms tightening around his neck as she sensed his urgency. "Are we almost to my mommy?" she asked. "Almost, sweetheart. Just a few more steps." But Rodriguez kept looking over his shoulder, his training and instincts telling him that this wasn't over yet. The fact that Emma had encountered someone who had scared her enough to run, and that a similar figure had been watching them at the construction site, suggested that this hadn't been a simple case of a child wandering off. Someone had been hunting in Times Square tonight, and Emma had almost become their prey. The thought made him hold her tighter as they approached the lights and safety of the main thoroughfare. But even surrounded by police officers and EMTs, Rodriguez couldn't shake the feeling that dangerous eyes were still watching from somewhere in the crowd. If this story has you hooked so far, subscribe, leave a like, and tell us in the comments what you would do in his place. Because what happens next will push Officer Rodriguez to his absolute limits. The moment Sarah saw her daughter in Rodriguez's arms, she let out a cry that was part relief, part joy, and part residual terror. Emma. "Oh God, Emma!" She rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as Rodriguez carefully transferred the little girl into her mother's waiting arms. "Mommy, I was so scared," Emma sobbed, burying her face in Sarah's shoulder. "I got lost, and there were so many people, and I couldn't find you anywhere." "It's okay, baby. You're safe now." "Mommy's here," Sarah whispered, holding her daughter so tightly it was as if she was afraid Emma might disappear again if she loosened her grip even slightly. Rodriguez watched the reunion with a mixture of satisfaction and continued unease. The immediate crisis was over. Emma was safe, unharmed, and back in her mother's arms. But his conversation with the little girl had raised new concerns that he couldn't ignore. "Sarah," he said gently, "I need to have Emma checked out by the paramedics, and then I'll need to ask her a few more questions about what happened tonight. There may have been someone who approached her before she got lost." Sarah's face went pale. "Someone approached her? You mean—" "We don't know anything for certain yet," Rodriguez said quickly. "But Emma was very smart and followed all the safety rules you taught her. That's probably what kept her safe." As the EMTs began their gentle examination of Emma, Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold. The same tall figure in dark clothing was back, this time standing near the TKTS booth, partially hidden behind a group of tourists, but clearly watching the scene unfolding at the red steps. Rodriguez immediately keyed his radio. "Central, suspect is back on scene. Male in black jacket, approximately 6 feet tall, currently positioned near the TKTS booth. I'm moving to intercept." 472 negative. Do not leave the child and mother. Units 479 and 4712 are moving to your position for suspect apprehension. Rodriguez watched in frustration as the figure seemed to sense the approaching officers and began moving through the crowd with practiced ease. He was clearly familiar with Times Square, knew exactly how to use the flow of people and the maze of streets to his advantage. "He's moving," Rodriguez radioed. "Subject heading north on Broadway, using the crowd for concealment." Rodriguez could see officers Kim and Patterson from units 4-7-9 and 4-7-12 pushing through the crowd, trying to maintain visual contact with their suspect. But Times Square on a Friday night was the perfect environment for someone who wanted to disappear. Hundreds of people, constant movement, multiple escape routes in every direction. "I lost him," came Patterson's voice over the radio. "Subject disappeared into the crowd near 48th Street. We're continuing pursuit." Rodriguez cursed under his breath. Every instinct told him to join the chase, to run down the predator who had potentially targeted Emma and might be looking for another victim. But his primary responsibility was to Emma and Sarah, to make sure they remained safe and that Emma was properly evaluated. Emma tugged on his uniform sleeve. "Officer Rodriguez? Is that the scary man? Is he why there are so many police cars here now?" Rodriguez knelt down to her level, making sure to keep his voice calm despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "Emma, I want you to not worry about any scary men, okay? You're surrounded by police officers now, and no one is going to hurt you. But it would help us a lot if you could tell me exactly what happened when you first got lost." Emma looked at her mother, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, I was standing right here with Mommy, and she was putting her phone in her purse, and I saw this really pretty dog across the street, and I just wanted to get a closer look. So I started walking toward it, but there were so many people, and by the time I got across the street, I couldn't see Mommy anymore. And that's when the man talked to you. Emma nodded. He came up to me and said he could help me find my mommy. But he seemed wrong somehow. Like when my teacher smiles at us, but she's really mad about something. So I ran away from him, but then I got even more lost. Rodriguez felt a cold rage building in his chest. This wasn't a case of a child simply wandering off. Someone had been actively hunting in Times Square, looking for exactly this kind of opportunity. A child separated from their parent for just a few seconds in a crowded, chaotic environment. His radio crackled. All units, subject has evaded capture. Expanding search perimeter to include subway entrances and adjacent blocks. All units maintain high alert. Rodriguez looked at Emma's innocent face and made a silent promise. Tonight, they had gotten lucky. Emma was safe, and her natural instincts had saved her from what could have been an unthinkable tragedy. But somewhere out there, a predator was still prowling, still hunting, and Rodriguez wasn't going to rest until that threat was eliminated. The rain had intensified while they stood there, turning the neon reflections on the pavement into liquid rivers of red, blue, and yellow light. Rodriguez pulled out his phone and showed Emma a picture of a police car. Emma, I want you and your mom to get in that police car right there with Officer Martinez. She's going to take you somewhere safe and warm while we finish looking for the man who scared you. Sarah's grip on Emma tightened. You think he's still out there? You think he might come back? Rodriguez didn't want to frighten them more than they already were, but he also couldn't lie to them about the reality of the situation. We're taking every precaution to make sure you're both safe. Emma did everything right tonight, and now we need to make sure no other child has to go through what she went through. As Officer Martinez escorted Sarah and Emma to the patrol car, Rodriguez's radio erupted with activity. All units, we've got a report of suspicious activity near the Port Authority. Male matching suspect description, seen approaching children near the bus terminal. Rodriguez felt his pulse spike. Port Authority was only a few blocks away, and it was exactly the kind of target-rich environment someone with malicious intent would choose. Hundreds of travelers, many of them families with children, many of them tourists unfamiliar with the area and potentially vulnerable. Central, this is 472. Request permission to respond to Port Authority. Negative, 472. You're needed at the scene for witness statements and case documentation. Rodriguez looked toward the patrol car where Emma and Sarah sat safely in the back seat, then looked toward the direction of Port Authority, where another child might be in danger at that very moment. The decision wasn't really a choice at all. He keyed his radio again. Central, 472. I have other units on scene who can handle documentation. I'm the only one who's actually seen this suspect in person tonight. My eyes could make the difference. There was a pause, then, copy, 472. You're authorized to respond. All units converging on Port Authority bus terminal. Rodriguez ran through the wet streets, his boots splashing through puddles that reflected the endless neon advertising that defined this part of Manhattan. The rain made everything more difficult, reduced visibility, slippery surfaces, and the sound of his radio partially drowned out by the drumming of water on pavement. As he approached Port Authority, he could see the organized chaos of multiple police units setting up a perimeter. The bus terminal was a massive complex with dozens of entrances, exits, and levels, exactly the kind of place where someone could disappear if they knew what they were doing. Unit 472 on scene, he radioed as he joined the other officers. What's our status? Sergeant Williams, a 20-year veteran who Rodriguez respected enormously, filled him in quickly. Security cameras caught a male matching your suspect's description on level 2 near the departure gates. He was observed approaching a family with young children, but when security started moving toward him, he disappeared into the crowd. Rodriguez studied the layout of the terminal, thinking like a predator would think. He knows we're onto him now. He's not going to try the same approach twice, but he's also not going to give up. People like this, they're compulsive. They can't help themselves. What are you thinking, Rodriguez? Rodriguez pointed toward the taxi and rideshare pickup area. He's going to try to leave the area, but he's also going to be looking for one last opportunity. That pickup area, families waiting for rides, kids tired from traveling, parents distracted with luggage and phones. It's exactly what he's looking for. Sergeant Williams nodded grimly. Let's move. They approached the pickup area carefully, Rodriguez's eyes scanning every face in the crowd. The rain had driven most people under the covered areas, creating clusters of families huddled together with their luggage. It was exactly the kind of environment where a predator could blend in, appear to be just another traveler, while actually hunting for victims. Then Rodriguez saw him. The man in the black jacket was standing near a pillar, partially concealed, but with a clear line of sight to a family with 2 young children who were waiting for their ride. The man's posture, his positioning, everything about his body language screamed predatory intent to Rodriguez's trained eyes. There, Rodriguez whispered into his radio. Northwest pillar, black jacket. He's watching the family with the 2 kids near the yellow cab. Rodriguez began moving through the crowd, trying to approach from an angle where the suspect wouldn't see him coming. But the man was experienced. He seemed to sense the approaching danger and began moving toward the family, his pace quickening. Rodriguez broke into a run, no longer caring about stealth. NYPD, stop, he shouted, but his voice was partially lost in the noise of traffic and rain. The suspect looked back, made eye contact with Rodriguez for just a split second, and Rodriguez saw something in those eyes that confirmed every instinct he'd had tonight. This was a dangerous man who had been hunting children in Times Square, and now he was making one final desperate attempt. The man lunged toward the family, reaching for the smaller of the 2 children, a little girl who couldn't have been more than 5 years old. Rodriguez tackled him from behind, sending both of them crashing to the wet pavement as the family screamed and scattered. "You're under arrest," Rodriguez panted, fighting to maintain control as the man struggled beneath him. But even as backup officers arrived to help secure the suspect, Rodriguez's mind was on Emma, safe now in that police car with her mother, unaware that her nightmare had almost repeated itself with another family just a few blocks away. The neon lights of the city continued their endless dance, reflecting off the rain-soaked streets, but tonight they seemed to shine a little brighter, as if celebrating the fact that no more children would be victims of the predator who now lay handcuffed on the pavement of Port Authority. 20 minutes later, Rodriguez stood outside the Port Authority as detectives led the suspect away in handcuffs. The man had been identified through his wallet as Marcus Chen, a 41-year-old with a history of approaching children in public places across 3 different states. What had started as a missing child case had turned into the capture of a serial predator who had been operating undetected for years. Rodriguez's hands were still shaking slightly from the adrenaline as he walked back toward Times Square through the rain-soaked streets. The neon lights seemed different now, less chaotic, less threatening. The crowds of people looked like what they actually were. Families enjoying their Friday night in the city, tourists taking photos, couples on dates, not potential threats hiding in every shadow. His radio crackled as he walked. "Unit 472, please respond to Times Square and 47th for witness follow-up." Rodriguez found Sarah and Emma still in the patrol car, Emma now wearing an NYPD baseball cap that was several sizes too big for her and drinking hot chocolate from a paper cup. When she saw Rodriguez approaching, her face lit up. "Officer Rodriguez, look what Officer Martinez gave me." She pointed proudly to the hat. "She said I was very brave tonight." "You were very brave," Rodriguez agreed, crouching down beside the open car door. You remembered everything your mom taught you about safety, and that's what kept you safe. Sarah looked at Rodriguez with eyes that still held traces of the terror she'd experienced, but also with profound gratitude. Officer Martinez told me you caught him, the man who scared Emma. Rodriguez nodded. He won't be scaring any more children. Emma's quick thinking and bravery tonight helped us catch someone who's been hurting families for a long time. Emma tugged on Rodriguez's sleeve. Officer Rodriguez, will you tell my teacher back home that I helped catch a bad guy? Rodriguez smiled, the first genuine smile he'd felt all evening. I'll write a letter to your teacher myself. But Emma, I want you to remember something important. What happened tonight wasn't your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes bad things happen to good people. But what matters is how brave and smart you were when it mattered most. Sarah reached out and shook Rodriguez's hand. I don't know how to thank you. When I couldn't find her, when I thought... Her voice broke. You saved my daughter's life tonight. Rodriguez looked at Emma, who was now making the brim of the oversized police cap fall down over her eyes and giggling. She saved herself, Sarah. I just helped her find her way back to you. A detective approached the car with a clipboard. We'll need to schedule a formal interview for early next week, but for tonight, you're free to go back to your hotel. We'll have a patrol unit escort you there and keep an eye on things, just as a precaution. As the patrol car pulled away with Sarah and Emma in the back seat, Emma pressed her face to the window and waved at Rodriguez. He waved back, watching until the red taillights disappeared into the flow of Manhattan traffic. Rodriguez looked around at Times Square, at the massive digital billboards advertising Broadway shows and consumer products, at the street performers and tourists and vendors who would be there every night, regardless of what dramas played out in the shadows. Tomorrow night, there would be other families here, other children marveling at the lights and energy of the city. But tonight, one little girl was safe in a hotel room with her mother instead of being a victim in some unspeakable crime. Tonight, a predator was in custody instead of hunting for his next target. Tonight, the good guys had won. Rodriguez keyed his radio one final time. Central, this is Unit 472, case closed, resuming normal patrol. As he walked back into the crowd, Rodriguez realized that he would carry this night with him for the rest of his career. Not as a burden, but as a reminder of why he wore the badge, why he walked these streets, why every call mattered. Because sometimes, being in the right place at the right time was the difference between a family's worst nightmare and their greatest relief. Rodriguez finished his shift at 0400 hours, but sleep didn't come easily when he finally made it home to his small apartment in Queens. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Emma's frightened face in that construction site, heard Sarah's desperate cries, felt the weight of responsibility that came with knowing that a child's life had hung in the balance. But he also saw Emma's smile when she'd waved goodbye from the police car, wearing that oversized NYPD cap and clutching her mother's hand. He thought about the text message Sarah had sent him an hour earlier. Emma wanted me to tell you that she wants to be a police officer when she grows up, just like Officer Rodriguez. The morning news would report the arrest of Marcus Chen, wanted in connection with multiple child endangerment cases across the Northeast. The reporters would focus on the manhunt, the dramatic arrest at Port Authority, the relief of families in 3 states who could finally sleep peacefully knowing that a predator was off the streets. But Rodriguez knew the real story wasn't about the arrest. It was about a 7-year-old girl who trusted her instincts, followed her mother's safety lessons, and was brave enough to run when something felt wrong. It was about a mother who never gave up hope during the worst hour of her life. It was about the dozens of police officers, dispatchers, EMTs, and security personnel who dropped everything to search for one lost child in a city of 8 million people. Rodriguez got up from his bed and walked to the window of his apartment, looking out over the Manhattan skyline. From here, he could see the glow of Times Square in the distance, that eternal beacon of light and energy that never slept, never stopped, never gave up. He thought about Emma and Sarah, probably asleep now in their hotel room, probably going to visit that toy store today as planned. Emma would have stories to tell her friends back in Ohio, stories about the big city and the bright lights and the police officer who helped her find her way home. But Rodriguez also knew that he would never again walk through Times Square without thinking about how quickly innocence could be threatened, how many predators moved through crowds looking for opportunities, how the difference between tragedy and triumph could come down to seconds and instincts and the willingness of good people to run toward danger instead of away from it. His phone buzzed with a text from his sergeant. "Outstanding work last night, Rodriguez. The whole department is proud of you." But Rodriguez didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man who had been given the privilege of wearing a badge and the responsibility that came with it. He felt like someone who had been in the right place at the right time to make sure that evil didn't triumph, that innocence was protected, that a little girl got to go home to her mother instead of becoming another victim. He thought about Emma's words. "I want to be a police officer when I grow up, just like Officer Rodriguez." Maybe someday, 20 years from now, Emma would indeed wear a badge. Maybe she would walk the streets of some city, protecting other children, other families, other innocent people who needed someone to stand between them and the darkness that sometimes crept into the world. And maybe, if he was very lucky, Rodriguez would live to see that day, to know that one frightening night in Times Square had inspired a new generation of guardians, protectors, heroes who understood that courage wasn't about being unafraid. Courage was about being afraid and doing the right thing anyway. Rodriguez closed his eyes and finally drifted off to sleep, knowing that when he woke up, he would put on his uniform again, pin on his badge again, and walk the streets of New York City again. Because somewhere in the city, another Emma might need him. Another Sarah might be crying for help. Another predator might be hunting for victims. And Officer Michael Rodriguez would be ready. If this story moved you, subscribe, turn on the bell, and share your thoughts in the comments. Because in a world that sometimes seems dark, it's important to remember that there are still people who dedicate their lives to standing between innocence and evil, between safety and danger, between hope and despair. The next mission might be closer than you think.